Welcome to the Live Unrestricted podcast, a show where you'll learn how to heal your relationship with food and your body so that you can focus your time and energy on more important things like your personal growth. I'm your host, Sabrina Magna, food freedom coach, and my mission is to help make your life happier and healthier without stress, overwhelm, or guilt about food. If you love the show, please do go out and share it. And if you're looking for support with your relationship with food, details about my programs are in the show notes. Thanks for spending time with me today. Now let's jump in. Welcome back to the show. Thank you so much for joining me today. We have a fascinating topic. Today we're talking about the power of your thoughts. So here's the thing, your thoughts are one of the most powerful drivers of your behaviors. They dictate your daily habits, how consistent or inconsistent you are, your ability to get back up after failure. They dictate your mental health, and as a result, your physical health too. But most people don't even know how to manage their thoughts. They are constantly living life on autopilot, and so they have a really hard time changing their behaviors when they don't understand the root cause of why they do what they do. And that's where cognitive behavioral therapy comes in. In today's episode, we're joined by an amazing guest, Kelly Watkins. Kelly is also known for Kelly, the CBT psychologist on Instagram. She is a qualified behavioral therapist and forensic psychologist. She's skilled in helping people retrain their negative thought patterns and behaviors through CBT. She's also passionate about normalizing the conversations surrounding our mental health. Her aim is to equip individuals with a greater understanding of themselves and the necessary skills to overcome past difficulties and current challenges. In this episode, you will learn what cognitive behavioral therapy is, how to understand the 5-element CBT model to become your own lifelong therapist and coach, how the CBT model can be used to treat eating disorders, disordered eating, and yo-yo dieting. We're going to talk about the power of self-esteem and why you need to develop self-esteem before achieving your goals, if you ever want to achieve your goals, what your core beliefs are, where they were formed, and how they shape you. We're going to share with you a practical exercise to help you begin changing your own core beliefs and your own thoughts so that you can change your behaviors permanently and consistently, and so much more. This conversation was so fascinating, and I could have talked to Kelly for hours. So let's get into today's interview with Kelly Watkins.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. And that was an amazing introduction. Thank you.
I did do my research because I was diving into rabbit holes. And when I was talking about all the things I wanted to ask you about, I have long list of questions, and I'm sure that I could have you again because you have such a incredible career before you, and I'm sure ahead of you. And so I really want to talk about CBT because you are, Kelly, the CBT psychologist on Instagram, and that is really what you specialize in. And CBT is something that I've learned about in my recent years as I started diving into eating disorders and disordered eatings and my own past with my relationship with food. So at a starting point, what is cognitive behavioral therapy?
So in a nutshell, it looks at your thoughts. So that's the cognitive part. It looks at your behavior, so the behavioral. And it's the idea that our thoughts, our behaviors, and our feelings all interlink with one another. So the idea that if we are able to challenge some of our negative thinking or change what we're doing, we're able to then make a difference in what we're thinking and what we're doing. So you can look at both ways, or you can look at one or the other. So it really kind of depends on what's going on for an individual, but it's a short-term therapy. So what I mean by that is that you wouldn't be doing it for years and years and years. It'll be really targeted on what you want to get out of therapy. And I think one of the headlines with CBT is that it gives you the skills to become your own therapist.
Mm-hmm.
So throughout your life, if there is ever a blip or if there is anything, then you've got the skills and you know what to do to be able to get you back to where you want to be.
I love the way that you put that, becoming your own therapist, because actually I teach my own clients the power of their thoughts and how their thoughts affect their behaviors and their behaviors affect their results, and and the what they get out of life. And I call it the self-coaching model, because that's exactly it. Once you actually understand how to do all of this, you can become your own coach, you can become your own therapy. And I really do believe that this is something that ever since I learned about my own thoughts and the power of my thoughts, it's something that you never really unlearn, because you don't just apply it to one area of your life. You can apply it to literally every area of your life.
Definitely, yeah. And I think it's just something that I don't think many people really understand, is exactly said, the power of your thoughts and how much of an impact your thoughts can have on everything. And as you said, once you know the skills, it's just about being like, okay, so I've got this skill, how can I adapt it for this? And then running with it and like, okay, yeah, this works. So yeah, it's amazing. And it's great that you're kind of using a similar sort of model to be able to help people through their journey.
Yeah, absolutely. And so how important would you say is the power of our thoughts? How much do they control our everyday actions and the results that we get in our lives?
It's so difficult because obviously we can't see what's going on in our heads. But if you can imagine, we probably have like thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of thoughts a day. And sometimes we have thoughts that are like, even though we're talking now, we've probably got a narration going on in our head of what we're going to say next, how we're going to say it. And I think that the more people are aware of whether it is a narration or whether it is maybe us being really critical on ourselves, that we can have so much going on in our heads, and it really can impact our ability to do things, or that tell us not to do certain things or engaging certain behaviors. And it really does, it can have a massive impact on what we're doing and our emotions as well, how we're feeling. And it's about unlocking, I suppose, being able to tune into what we're thinking about and then being able to do something with it. But I just think it just massively impacts everything. I can't really think of anything where it doesn't really impact
Yeah.
on our, yeah.
And what would you say? Would you say that there's a difference? Because I think that a lot of people think that they know what they're thinking. And there's a very big difference between the thoughts that we have on a conscious level and the thoughts that we have on a subconscious level. And so do you delineate the two? And when it comes to the CBT model, does it talk about more the thoughts that we know that we're having, or the thoughts that we don't necessarily know that we're having on a daily basis?
I think a bit of both. I think you probably start off with the ones that you're more aware of. But even with that, I think it comes with practice to actually be able, because it's almost like you have the thoughts that are maybe a little bit more clearer, that you can hear louder. And then once we start to unpack them, then there may be some other thoughts, almost like layers of thoughts, that can come out. And I think that once you start working with your thoughts and almost tuning into them, then you can understand the ones that are more present or the ones that are more muted, and being able to work with both of them, because they can both have an impact on what we're doing or how we're feeling. So I think with CBT, initially you start off with the ones that we're more aware of, but I definitely feel through some of the skills practice, whether that is outside of the session or within the session, you can really unpack the other layers of thoughts as well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And so is there a specific CBT model of thoughts and behaviors and how they interact with one another? Like, let's say someone was coming to you and they know nothing about CBT, and maybe they don't have the resources to talk to someone. Do you necessarily need someone to talk to, or is there some work that you can start doing on yourself? And I would love to also wrap it around disordered eating and yo-yo dieting, because a lot of my clients, what I see repeatedly is they don't know what thoughts they're having. They don't know what's driving their overeating or their self-sabotage. All they feel is their behaviors, and they feel powerless because they don't know what's driving that. And not necessarily everyone has the capacity to get a coach or to go to therapy. So where would you start?
I think one of the things I start with pretty much everyone that comes through my door. So I'll do an assessment session, and what I'm going to explain is something that anyone can do. You don't need to go to therapy to get this. And I think, so you first start off, it's just like a diary. So every sort of situation that triggers some sort of strong emotion or a change in your behavior, you just note down just a brief description of what that situation is. And then once you've got that situation, you note down, okay, what am I actually thinking in that situation? So you're starting to unpack, kind of pull out what am I actually thinking? And then you look at, okay, so I'm thinking this, what is that making me feel? And then kind of listing maybe one or a couple of emotions. And then what am I doing? So is that for me engaging in overeating? Am I restricting? So what is the behavior? So if you're saying maybe a lot of the people that you work with, that they start with their behaviors, that situation may be really strongly linked to what their behavior is. And then if you wanted to add another kind of column, so to speak, you could look at how I cope or how I coped in that situation. And then thinking about, is that helpful or unhelpful? So it's just a really simple diary. I'm doing this with my hands. No one can see my hands. Like, it's just like, it's a chart of basically what someone is going through. And you could do that just for one thing a day, or you could do it every time it comes up throughout your day.
Okay, so we've got a chart here. So what are if we can recap, what are the different elements of the chart for anyone who might be like listening and want to take down, what are the different elements of this chart?
So you've got the situation.
Okay, situation.
What's that situation that kind of triggered some sort of change in you or some sort of behavior, any sort of situation you think this is important. Then what are you thinking? So what are your thoughts? Would be the next column. What the emotion is or what you're feeling in that situation when you're thinking those things. Then the behavior, what are you doing in that situation when you're thinking those things, when you're feeling those things, what are you actually doing? And then the bonus column, so to speak. Or you could, I suppose, let me rewind. The other one, you could add in about physical symptoms. So some people are really driven quite strongly by maybe that tenseness in their chest or feeling quite hot. So you may want to add in a column of physical sensations. And then the bonus one would be how I coped. So was it helpful or was it unhelpful for me?
Okay. I wrote all this down, and it's so funny because I use a very similar process when it comes to my clients. Very similar, but it's funny. I think I use different words for every single one. So when you say situation, I use circumstance. So what is the circumstance here? Is it, and the thing about a circumstance is that it's going to be neutral no matter what. It's not going to be good or bad. It's going to be good or bad based on the thought that you give to it. So then we go to the thought, and then what feeling comes out of that thought? Do you feel positive? Do you feel lonely? And then what actions do you take when you feel negative, when you feel lonely, when you feel stressed? And then the results that come out of that, which is your version of behavior, which is my actions, and then how I coped, which is the results you get out of that. So I love that. And so I would love to take an example. So I'm going to try to think of something that a lot of my clients struggle with when it comes to their behaviors and not acknowledging where those come from, because I know that we talked about this before we got on this interview, that disordered eating and our relationship with food has a lot to do with this model. So you have worked with eating disorders, and I know that CBT is a model of therapy that is used very often to treat eating disorders. So how does our relationship with food wrap into the CBT model and yo-yo dieting and disordered eating?
Yeah, I think that with the kind of eating disorders, there's specific CBT models for each type of disordered eating. So if we're thinking about bulimia, if we're thinking about anorexia, the treatment model is slightly different. However, you still look at the thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. And then if we're thinking about potentially maybe more like yo-yo dieting or emotional eating, you would again use a similar, what we just went through, that chart to really unpack and get someone to understand why they're engaging in the yo-yo behavior. And then you'd look at, so what can we change? And that's when you'd bring in more of the intervention stage. So you think about, is it that I need to challenge maybe some of my negative thinking? Is it that I need to live a more meaningful and well-rounded life? And then you put that into place. So you'd probably separate the two between the eating disorders and the more kind of emotional eating, yo-yo dieting. Just because in terms of the evidence base behind it, that's behind the eating disorders. but you can still use CBT skills for the other side of it, so the yo-yo dieting, emotional eating, if that makes sense. So yeah, got the two
Yeah.
different areas.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that a lot of it, so when we go back to that chart that you just explained, which is our thoughts cause our emotions, which cause our behaviors. What most people, when they struggle with yo-yo dieting and disordered eating, is they focus so much on the behaviors and they don't actually dive deeper into what is causing the behaviors. And so when they're experiencing the binging, the overeating, the emotional eating, the sugar cravings, which is, the most common symptoms that people feel, the first thing that they do is, instead of looking at, okay, what thoughts am I having about food, about myself, about my body, which is causing me to feel a certain way, which is causing me to overeat, the first thing that they go to is, well, it must be that there's just something wrong with me. I don't have enough willpower. I don't have enough discipline. And we think that it's a character flaw. And I always explain that all of our actions can have a root cause reason to it. And a lot of the times when it comes to the behaviors that you're experiencing, which is overeating or binging or feeling out of control around food, you weren't born that way. You weren't born with low willpower or lack of discipline or all of those things that you might think that you have. You've learned different ways of relating to food and of relating to your body that has caused you to feel that way. So I would love to go through the model. So for example, I'm going to take a classic example of someone who has been maybe started dieting when they were 18 years old or when they were in their 20s after having their first kid. And when they first started dieting, it was really just because they didn't feel good in their bodies. Maybe they wanted to lose the baby weight or the freshman 15. And the most logical thing to do for them was, okay, well, I'm just going to start eating less or cutting carbs. And what that does is it kind of just spirals into fear about all foods, because you start looking more into nutrition and there's all this fear mongering about sugar and all that. And all of these intentions that you had in the beginning that were really pure, all you wanted to do was get healthier and potentially lose weight, turns into this obsession and this fear of food, so much so that every time you go to sit down, you're thinking about, oh my God, how is this going to affect the scale tomorrow morning? Or how is this going to affect my body? And we're so scared to eat that we end up restricting, and then we overeat. And so for someone who feels obsessed with food and their behaviors reflect that, because they end up overeating, they feel out of control around food because they're constantly living in a state of scarcity, how would they apply the CBT model? They're feeling the obsession, they're feeling the overeating, but they want to get to the root cause of it. How would they apply that model? I know that's a loaded question, but
there could be so many different avenues. Obviously, as we said before we started this, it's so individual to everyone, and I think it would be about looking at what's the function of their behavior. So kind of thinking about understanding what is it that's leading them to engage in their behavior. Is it because, and this is kind of jumping a few steps, but is it because they don't feel good enough? Is it because they feel unattractive? Is it because they feel that they're a failure? So kind of really going down to those are the negative core beliefs. And that's what I mean, jumping ahead, you would need to do some work to understand what they are. And once you can really unpack what it is that is the driving force of them overeating or restricting, then you can work out, okay, what is it that we're working with? Is it we're maybe working with self-esteem and we're going to try and boost self-esteem and go down that model? Or is it that we'd work quite behaviourally with being able to manage the binging? And obviously I'm not a dietitian, I don't understand that sort of thing, so I kind of still look at it from a mental health perspective. So it would be more about managing that behavior, being able to look at even a mood food diary, looking at the connection between different foods when they eat it. Is there other ways that we can do these things? Is it kind of, I mentioned about that well-rounded life, if they're so focused on their food and what they're eating and what not they're not eating, and they're not even doing things that they enjoy anymore. So like trying to maybe bring in those things into their life, and creating a more balanced life. And
yeah, I love that. I'm writing notes, and I love that you're bringing in all of these pieces, because it is so true. I'm a holistic health coach, and when we talk about health, it's not just the food, it's not just the nutrition. It is like when you talk about a well-balanced life, I always say, don't put all of your joy into one basket. If all of your joy that you get is from your marriage or your job or food, then of course you're going to have a hard time finding joy in other areas of your life. And a lot of people, what happens is that they suck the joy out of their relationships and out of their jobs and out of all their friendships, because they put so much focus on dieting, and we know that dieting it takes up so much mental energy. And so of course all of our joy gets put into food. It becomes our comfort, it becomes our friend that's always going to be there, that's reliable. And so it's of course very difficult to stop emotional eating when you haven't looked at how can I diversify my joy and bring more joy into other areas of my life. I want to come back to what you were talking about before, which is self-esteem. Because let's say someone is struggling with their eating behaviors, they're overeating, they're binging. Their first thought is never going to be, I need to work on my self-esteem. Right? Like that is never people's first thoughts. And of course I do so much work when it comes to that. And you mentioned before a food and mood journal, which is one of the tools that I use in my program as well. But self-esteem and having self-belief and having self-love and compassion, how important is it actually to our daily behaviors, to the daily habits that we tend to incorporate and stay consistent with? Does it actually matter? Like, why should people focus on that?
I think because it can be at the core of so many things, that even if we think about anxiety, that if someone doesn't trust themselves or believe that they've got the right skills to be able to make a decision, they're going to feel anxious. Or it could be because someone doesn't feel good enough because of what they've experienced growing up, and that could lead to depression. So even though you can look at all these other kind of mental health diagnoses or disorders, that self-esteem can be so underpinned and almost kind of like the nest that is holding all these other difficulties. And it may be that once you're able to actually see, okay, so what do I actually think about myself? When I look in the mirror, am I being like, oh no, you can't wear that, or you look too fat, or you don't look nice enough, like, and you're being really mean to yourself, and then you're being, and whether that's conscious or not so conscious, that's fueled by your self-esteem. So if you're not working with that, then you go to binge eating to kind of comfort you because you've looked in the mirror and you don't like what you see, and then you're engaging in that. So if you're able to be like, okay, no, this is actually my self-esteem, I need to go deep, but going that deep can be scary.
Yeah, it's so scary. And that's the thing about doing the work to heal your relationship with food and your body. It's not comfortable. It's not as easy as just throwing a diet, a quick, magic pill, and then being done with it, because you are uncovering a lot of things. And sometimes this goes back to childhood. And like you said, self-esteem, if you think that you don't have the ability to do something, you have no confidence in yourself, you have no self-trust, then the second that times get hard, the second that maybe you quote unquote fail, or you're working to heal your relationship with food and you end up overeating, if you have a core belief that you're always going to be a failure, that you're never going to be able to amount to anything, it is so much easier to give up on yourself. And it's not going to be that one bad day or that, couple of weeks of bad weeks that is going to make or break you. It's going to be your ability to get back up and to keep doing the work. And if you don't have that self-esteem, then you're not going to be able to stay consistent, which is why so many people are yo-yoing constantly. They're up and down because they're not consistent, because they're giving up on themselves because of a lack of self-esteem.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I've got nothing more to this. Definitely. I think that, and sometimes I like to use a phrase like your bounce back ability, like how much, like regardless of what is thrown at you, you're able to bounce back. And the more you work on your self-esteem, the easier it is to be resilient, to bounce back after perceived failures or actual failures, whatever they may be. But more it's being able to bounce back from what life throws at you.
Right. And so a lot of people, what I definitely see very often is they think that self-esteem comes from your success. It comes from your actions. If I am able to lose this much weight, then I will be confident. Or if I achieve this, if I write a book, if I launch a podcast, I'm just launching my podcast, then I will feel confident. What are your thoughts on that? And does self-esteem come after or before the success?
I think all of those things, they're all conditions, aren't they? That if I ... then I'll be happy, or then I'll be successful. But then when that comes, who's to say that there's not going to be something else that comes after that? So I think it always can come before. Yes, you can get little peaks of it after you achieve something. Of course, you should celebrate all your achievements. But then if you haven't worked on your self-esteem, as soon as you get that little peak of something that you've achieved, then you're going to get that critical voice being like, oh, yeah, you've done your podcast, but you haven't done that. And then it's like, okay, well, I need to go and do that now to feel good enough. And that's what I mean. It's, if you're able to do that before, then you can be able to, you're able to celebrate your successes, but for it to be more stable rather than dependent on some sort of condition.
Yeah. And I think that it's also just really hard to achieve anything if you don't have that self-esteem, because same thing. Let's say I had went into this podcast launch with the thought of, well, this is going to suck and I'm not going to be good at it. Then there would be that one interview or that one hardship that would just throw me off and say, well, I knew that I wouldn't be able to do this, so might as well just give up now. And like you were saying before, I was talking to one of my clients yesterday, and she was saying how her entire life wanted to just keep losing weight. And I asked her, what would be the amount of weight that you would need to lose for you to wake up one morning and think, now I've done it. Now I'm happy. Now I'm done. I don't have to keep going. And she said, there's no number. There's never, when you're trying to hate yourself thin and the entire way you're not building confidence, you don't love yourself, you're not accepting your body, then there isn't going to be a day where you wake up one morning, you see a number on the scale and it goes 180 in your mind of, now I can love myself. Now I feel good. If you hated yourself every step of the process.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a really good question. Like, what is it going to take for me to actually accept and love myself? And if you haven't got a definitive answer, and even if you do, once you achieve that, I don't think that would still be your answer.
Yeah. 100%. I mean, I talked to so many women who say, when I was 20 years old, 30 years old, I was 50 pounds lighter and I hated my body back then. And what I wish that I could do is go back to that self and go back to that body and just say, love yourself now. And you have that ability to do that now. Before we wrap up, I just want to talk about this because you mentioned core beliefs. And I know that's a really big piece of CBT. So what are core beliefs? What does it mean? And how important are they?
So if you imagine a tree, so you've got your core beliefs are like your roots. And then you have things called rules and assumptions. So they are statements like I should, I shouldn't, I must, I mustn't. That's like the trunk of your tree. And then you've got the leaves, the twigs at the top are your thoughts. So your core beliefs feed into all of it. They feed into the rules that we place on ourselves and others. They feed into our thoughts. So if we don't learn what our negative core beliefs are, then we may still always be stuck in thinking negatively. So it's really like an important piece of work to understand what our negative core beliefs are, because then we can change them to more balanced or more positive beliefs. But in CBT, the negative core beliefs always start with an I am statement.
Okay.
So it's always, I am not good enough. I am a failure. I am worthless. I am unlovable. But you need to be able to look at that, to be able to balance that, to change that, to be able to make those differences in other areas.
And how do we form our core beliefs? Are we born with them? Do we learn them through our parents, through experiences?
It can be through, and there's different kind of schools of thought. There's some schools of thought that say that they're developed by the time, like within our critical period, so by the time we're age 7. Other things, if we have maybe different critical incidents as we're growing up, potentially maybe losing a loved one or having a big breakup of a relationship or like a friendship, that they can change. But we do learn them from other people, like not necessarily like our biological parents, but any sort of caregiver or teacher or sibling. We can adopt the beliefs of others. So they do develop in our early life, and they can be replicated as we grow up.
Okay. And could they also be developed through repeated circumstances? So, for example, I'm just trying to think of women who have dieted and failed and dieted and failed and dieted and failed over and over again. I feel like you're bound to start thinking that you're a failure, and that is bound to become a core belief. So, can those be formed later on in your life as well?
They can be, but I would probably argue that there's something underneath that from younger that it's probably mimicking something. It may not be as closely related as to do with diet, but there's going to be something of a similar nature that made the reason why that core belief was so strong when you're older.
Okay, so our core beliefs are not only going to affect one area of our life. Let's say you have a core belief that you are a failure, or you're not, you can't set your mind to anything. Then it's going to affect how successful you are in maybe your job or your eating habits or your self-care, or your personal growth, and all of that.
Yeah, so it may not be all areas, but it will definitely be potentially a couple.
Yeah, definitely. And I know I was really thankful to grow up with some absolutely amazing parents. And one core belief that they instilled in me is you can accomplish anything you set your mind to. And I think that I've proven that to myself through my experiences, through traveling and starting a business and all these things. But had I not had that core belief, I never would have gone after those things because I wouldn't think that I could achieve them.
Yeah, exactly. But how you've kind of explained up what you went through, but people can learn to be that for themselves, to give themselves that those sorts of more positive beliefs, and you can it's just about changing and shifting what's going on.
So if you could wrap it up in like 1 or 2 minutes of how to change your core beliefs, if you are an adult, you are no longer growing up with your parents telling you, putting those onto you, how do we go about changing our core beliefs?
First of all, once you've unpacked what it actually is, which is called the downward arrow technique, there's a video on my YouTube that explains it. I can't go into it.
What is it called?
The downward arrow technique.
Downward arrow technique. Okay.
So once you've done that, you want to start to balance out your beliefs. So say if your negative core belief is I am not good enough, and a more balanced belief could be I am enough. Every day, look for 1 to 3 pieces of evidence that prove that you are enough or prove that you are not good enough.
Okay.
And you're gathering that evidence, and you do that over a prolonged period of time, and slowly, that will your new balanced belief will start to kick out the other one. Obviously, there'll be other stuff that you can do, but if you want to focus on core beliefs, that would be the perfect place to start.
Okay. So basically what you're saying is this one belief that I want to start believing, I'm going to set an intention to start looking at things in my life that prove this belief that I am enough, that I am successful.
Yep.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I love that. And I do that with my clients when it comes to I am successful. I am able to set my mind to whatever I want. Look at your job, look at your career, look at your relationships, look at different areas of your life.
Absolutely everything. And it doesn't matter. They don't have to be big things. They could just be that you put yourself first and like took time out to read a magazine, or you did a hair mask, or it could be bigger things like you were assertive at work or assertive with someone. So it can be a wide variety, and the more the breadth of the evidence, the better.
Absolutely. And how important do you think that it is to work with someone to start changing your beliefs and to really get to the root cause of all of your behaviors and all of your actions? Do you think that you can do it by yourself, or do you think it's really important to talk to someone about this and to have feedback?
I think a bit of both. That you can definitely do some exploratory work, but as we said, it can be quite difficult. It can be quite deep. So sometimes to have that professional support there is essential. But you can definitely start to explore it by yourself by all means. So you don't have to have a therapist or a therapist or a coach or whatever, that because that may not be accessible for everyone. So I think you can definitely start to explore it on yourself.
Yeah. And one big challenge I see is most people don't know what they don't know. So it can be hard to uncover what your core beliefs are, given that they operate on such an autopilot for you. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Kelly. I've taken up more of your time, but you are fascinating and I love this conversation. Could talk to you for hours, but if anyone wants to learn more about how they can work with you, I know that you have a big presence on social media as well. How can they connect with you?
So Instagram is kelly.the.cbt.psychologist. I didn't think about that when I created it. And my website is kellywatkins.co.uk. And if you go on there, I think there's like links to my YouTube. If not, my YouTube is linked on my Instagram, and my handle on there is just Kelly Watkins.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, all of those places.
Amazing. And I'm going to put that all in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining us today, Kelly. I really appreciate it. And thank you to everyone listening for joining us. And we'll see you on the next episode. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you found it valuable, I would love if you would share it with someone you know that could benefit. If you're loving the show, don't forget to subscribe over on Apple Podcasts so you don't miss a single episode. I really love hearing feedback from you, so please leave a rating and review over on Apple to help us get in the ears of more people who need it the most. Finally, come hang out with me on Instagram at Sabrina Magna Health for more educational content and get up close and personal with me. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you on the next episode. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you found it valuable, I would love if you would share it with someone you know that could benefit. If you're loving the show, don't forget to subscribe over on Apple Podcasts so you don't miss a single episode. I really love hearing feedback from you, so please leave a rating and review over on Apple to help us get in the ears of more people who need it the most. Finally, come hang out with me on Instagram at Sabrina Magna Health for more educational content and get up close and personal with me. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you on the next episode.